In June of 2015, a young photographer named Finn Brown vanished inside Yosemite National Park. There were no witnesses, no body, no final message. All that remained was a shattered tripod lying near the edge of a cliff, its legs twisted as if wrenched apart by panic or force. Rangers assumed the obvious. A misstep, a fall, another tragic statistic swallowed by wilderness too vast to argue with. Search teams scoured the river below for weeks, then months, then years. Eventually, Finn Brown was declared missing, presumed dead. The case was closed without answers. But Finn Brown did not die in Yosemite. While the world mourned a promising artist lost to nature, Finn was alive, confined, sedated, stripped of language and name inside a closed psychiatric facility less than 50 miles away. To the staff, he was not Finn Brown. He was patient 402, a non-verbal male with dissociative amnesia, admitted after being found wandering disoriented and incoherent near a service road. No identification, no past, no advocates. For 4 years, he existed without identity. This was not an accident. This was not fate. And Yosemite was never the beginning of the story. To understand what happened to Finn Brown, you have to go back more than a decade, long before the cameras, the accolades, and the national parks. You have to return to a high school cafeteria where laughter echoed too loudly, where cruelty passed as humor, and where one girl learned how easily a life could be erased without anyone noticing. Because long before Finn Brown disappeared, someone else did first. Her name was Grace Thorne. She wasn't missing. She wasn't searched for. She simply faded out of classrooms, out of records, out of memory. Grace grew up poor, quiet, and unseen in a town that rewarded confidence and punished vulnerability. While Finn learned that charm could excuse anything, Grace learned the opposite, that silence was survival. When Finn singled her out, mocked her publicly, and turned her into a joke others could safely laugh at, it wasn't just humiliation. It was a public execution of identity. And it didn't end there. What followed were years of psychological warfare disguised as adolescence. Whispered comments, public jokes, social isolation, the kind of bullying that doesn't bruise skin but fractures a mind. By 15, Grace Thorne was suffering from panic attacks so severe she couldn't speak in class. She stopped making eye contact. She stopped existing. Her family did the unthinkable to save her. They ran. New town, new records, new last name. Grace Thorne became Grace Miller. On paper, the girl Finn Brown destroyed no longer existed. But memory doesn't obey paperwork. Trauma does not forget. While Finn moved forward unburdened, admired, celebrated, Grace moved inward. She studied the brain, not to understand it, but to master it. Memory, isolation, identity erosion. She didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. Revenge was loud, temporary, unsatisfying. Grace wanted symmetry. At Silver Creek Clinic, a privately funded psychiatric research facility operating just inside legal gray zones, she found the missing piece, Dr. Arthur Ellis. A brilliant man with a dangerous flaw, he believed. Ethics were obstacles to progress. Together, they explored how identity could be dismantled without physical harm, how memory could be suppressed, how a human being could be erased without killing the body. They needed a subject, and fate or calculation delivered one. When Grace discovered Finn Brown had become a rising photographer, living freely and admired for capturing the beauty of the world, she didn't feel anger. She felt certainty. Yosemite was chosen carefully, a place where disappearance made sense, a place where nature could be blamed, a place where bureaucracy would do the rest. Finn's fall was never into a river. It was into a system designed to make him disappear as completely as Grace once had. And for 4 years, while the world believed Finn Brown was dead, Grace watched him lose everything: his voice, his memories, his name. For her, this was not cruelty. It was balance. Finn Brown was the kind of person teachers described as full of potential and peers described as impossible to ignore. He grew up in comfort, financially secure, emotionally supported, and constantly reassured that he was destined for something bigger. His parents encouraged independence, creativity, and confidence, and Finn absorbed those lessons completely. By the time he reached adolescence, he moved through the world with the ease of someone who had never been told no in a way that truly mattered. Attention followed him effortlessly. In school, Finn learned early that humor could bend situations in his favor. A sharp remark could deflect criticism. A clever joke could redirect blame. Sarcasm became his signature, quick, polished, and devastatingly effective. Teachers tolerated it because he was bright. Classmates excused it because he was popular. Finn himself barely noticed it at all. To him, words were tools, not weapons. Photography entered his life around the same time. At first, it was casual borrowing his father's camera, experimenting with angles, discovering how framing could transform the ordinary into something striking. But Finn quickly realized the deeper power of the lens. Behind the camera, he controlled the narrative. He decided what mattered, what was seen, and what was cut out entirely. Photography wasn't just a passion, it was reinforcement. Every compliment, every shared image, every moment of admiration confirmed what Finn already believed, that he had an eye for truth. What he never examined was how selectively he defined it. By high school, Finn's social orbit had hardened into hierarchy. There were people who mattered and people who didn't. His humor increasingly relied on that distinction. When Finn made a joke, it landed upward or sideways, never downward in his mind. If someone was hurt, it was because they were too sensitive. If someone became a target, it was because they couldn't take a joke. Grace Thorne didn't fit into Finn's world at all. She was quiet where he was loud, invisible where he was admired. She sat alone, spoke rarely, and carried herself as if trying not to be noticed. To Finn, she wasn't a person, she was negative space. And negative space, once noticed, could be filled. The first public humiliation happened in the cafeteria. It was brief, almost forgettable to anyone not on the receiving end. A comment about her clothes, a joke about her silence. Laughter rippled across the room. Finn didn't look at Grace when it happened. He looked at the reaction. That was the part that mattered. What Finn didn't see was how that moment crystallized something permanent. After that, Grace became a reference point, a safe target, the kind of person no one defended because no one identified with her. Finn's remarks grew more precise, more casual, woven into daily life so seamlessly they barely registered as cruelty. To Finn, it was social currency. To Grace, it was erosion. And still, Finn never considered himself a bully. From his perspective, he was generous with attention. If he noticed someone, it meant they existed. If he joked about them, it meant they mattered enough to be acknowledged. The idea that his behavior could dismantle someone else's sense of safety never crossed his mind. Empathy was abstract, something discussed, not practiced. As Finn's confidence grew, so did his detachment. By the time graduation approached, his future felt inevitable. Art school, travel, a life shaped by creativity and freedom. His teachers praised his portfolio. His peers admired his ambition. Finn left town with the clean certainty of someone unburdened by memory. Grace Thorne did not. Finn never noticed when she stopped coming to school. He never questioned why her name disappeared from attendance lists or yearbooks. To him, she simply faded, another background detail removed from the frame. And that was the pattern Finn carried into adulthood. He moved through relationships easily, leaving little damage behind that he could see. If something ended badly, he framed it as incompatibility. If someone was hurt, it was unfortunate but never his by responsibility. Finn documented the world obsessively, yet remained curiously blind to the impact he had within it. By his early 20s, Finn Brown was becoming exactly what everyone expected, a talented photographer with a growing reputation, drawn to dramatic landscapes and raw emotion. His work captured vulnerability beautifully, fear, solitude, fragility, without ever recognizing how familiar those states truly were. When Finn planned his trip to Yosemite in the summer of 2015, it felt symbolic, a place of scale and permanence, a chance to capture nature untouched by human cruelty. He never considered that someone else had been framing him all along. Grace Thorne learned early that the world rewards volume. Those who spoke loudly were heard. Those who demanded space were given it. Grace did neither. She was born into instability, financially fragile, emotionally cautious, and constantly aware of how easily attention could turn into threat. While other children learned confidence, Grace learned calculation, how to stay quiet, how to avoid notice, how to disappear just enough to survive. School was not a place of learning for Grace, it was exposure. She moved through hallways like a ghost, keeping her eyes low, shoulders tight, rehearsing silence as a defense mechanism. Teachers rarely called on her. Students rarely acknowledged her. For a time, invisibility worked. It was a small, fragile safety. Finn Brown shattered it. The humiliation in the cafeteria was not violent in any obvious way. No shouting, no physical contact, just a few words delivered with perfect timing, sharpened by laughter. What made it unbearable wasn't the insult itself, it was the confirmation. Grace was visible now, and not as a person, but as an object. After that, there was no refuge. The bullying didn't announce itself. It embedded quietly into daily life. Comments whispered just loudly enough to hear, smiles that carried threat, the unspoken agreement that Grace was fair game. Finn was never alone in it, but he was the axis everything rotated around. His approval set the tone. Others followed. Grace tried to endure. She told herself it would end, that if she stayed silent long enough, invisible enough, it would pass. Instead, it intensified. Her body began to react before her mind could. Panic attacks came without warning, heart racing, breath trapped, vision narrowing. She stopped eating in public, stopped speaking in class. Eventually, she stopped speaking at all unless absolutely necessary. At 15, Grace was diagnosed with severe anxiety and acute stress disorder. The school recommended accommodations, counseling, monitoring. None of it mattered. The damage wasn't happening in classrooms, it was happening inside her. Her parents watched their daughter dissolve in real time. They saw her flinch at laughter, freeze at eye contact, spiral at the mention of school. One night, after a particularly violent panic attack left Grace unable to breathe, they made a decision that felt both drastic and inevitable. They would erase her. The move happened quickly. Another state, another town. Records transferred, names adjusted. The Thorne family vanished from one system and reappeared in another. Grace Thorne became Grace Miller. On paper, the past was gone. But trauma does not respect geography. Grace carried every memory intact, preserved with unnatural clarity. Faces, voices, the precise cadence of Finn Brown's jokes. While her outward life reset, her internal world hardened around one fixed idea: control. She excelled academically, not from ambition, but from obsession. Biology, neuroscience, psychology. She gravitated toward subjects that explained why people broke and how they could be remade. Memory fascinated her most not as a narrative, but as a mechanism, something stored, altered, suppressed. In college, Grace was unremarkable socially, but exceptional intellectually. Professors described her as focused, clinical, unemotional. They mistook containment for absence. Grace didn't feel less, she felt deliberately. She understood something early that others didn't. Healing was optional. Power was not. Medical school refined her purpose. She studied isolation not as cruelty, but as stimulus. She studied identity erosion as a process, not a tragedy. Where others saw ethics, Grace saw inefficiency. She wasn't interested in revenge fantasies or confrontation. She wanted symmetry. She wanted balance. Silver Creek Clinic offered her that opportunity. The facility presented itself as a research-oriented psychiatric center specializing in extreme dissociative disorders. In reality, it operated in the margins: private funding, limited oversight, experimental protocols shielded by complex consent structures. It attracted minds like Grace's, and it housed Dr. Arthur Ellis. Ellis was brilliant, driven, and fundamentally incurious about suffering that didn't advance his work. He believed memory defined identity, and that identity could be dismantled and rebuilt with enough precision. Grace recognized him immediately as dangerous and useful. Their collaboration was seamless. Grace provided discipline, patience, and personal insight. Ellis provided resources, authority, and indifference. Together, they explored how long-term isolation, controlled narratives, and pharmaceutical intervention could destabilize even the most confident psyche. They needed a subject who would not be missed too closely, someone whose disappearance could be explained, someone whose past could be quietly severed. Grace didn't search for Finn Brown. She waited. When she finally saw his name attached to a gallery showing "Smiling and Free," something settled into place. Not rage, not fear. Certainty. Silver Creek Clinic did not look like a place where people disappeared. From the outside, it resembled a modern rehabilitation center, clean architecture, neutral colors, and carefully landscaped grounds designed to communicate calm. The language used in its brochures was deliberate. Cutting-edge research, patient-centered care, innovative approaches to severe dissociative disorders. Everything about the clinic suggested progress and compassion. What it actually offered was insulation. The clinic operated under a private research charter, funded by a combination of pharmaceutical grants and anonymous donors with an interest in behavioral science. Oversight existed, but only in fragments. Ethics committees reviewed proposals without seeing outcomes. Inspectors visited, announced, and infrequently. Patients arrived already marginalized, often unidentified, uninsured, or legally unrepresented. They were people the system had already failed. To Silver Creek, that made them ideal. Dr. Arthur Ellis had been drawn to the clinic for exactly that reason. A neuropsychiatrist with a celebrated academic past, Ellis believed the greatest obstacle to scientific advancement was moral hesitation. He argued that the mind could not be fully understood without pushing it to collapse. His published work spoke cautiously of memory suppression and identity fragmentation. His private research went much further. Ellis didn't see patients. He saw variables. Grace Miller fit into his world effortlessly. She didn't challenge his authority or moral framework. She refined it. Where Ellis was impulsive, Grace was meticulous. Where he pursued breakthroughs, she pursued process. Together, they developed protocols that blurred the line between treatment and erasure. Isolation was the foundation. Patients selected for the program were cut off from external stimuli, no mirrors, no clocks, no access to personal information. Names were replaced with numbers. Speech was discouraged under the pretense of reducing cognitive stress. Medications were introduced slowly, adjusted constantly, designed to suppress memory formation while heightening suggestibility. The goal was not amnesia. It was disorientation. Over time, subjects lost narrative continuity. Without anchors, no past, no future, no identity. They became dependent on the environment for meaning. Staff controlled that meaning. Reality was administered in doses. Grace documented everything. She tracked how long it took for patients to stop asking questions, when they stopped using first-person language, when they responded to numbers more readily than names. She observed the precise moment identity fractured not with drama, but with quiet resignation. To Grace, it was familiar. She recognized the symptoms because she had lived them: the hypervigilance, the withdrawal, the internal collapse disguised as compliance. Silver Creek didn't invent these techniques, it refined them. Grace simply understood how to make them permanent. When Finn Brown arrived, he was not introduced as a subject of interest. He was logged as patient 402. Officially, he had been found wandering disoriented near a service road, suffering from acute dissociative amnesia following presumed trauma. There were no personal effects, no identification. The intake file was clean because it had been designed to be. Bureaucracy absorbed him without resistance. Grace never appeared in his room. She watched through reports, charts, and surveillance footage. This was important. Proximity risked recognition, and recognition risked collapse. The success of the process depended on distance. Patient 402 resisted at first. He attempted speech. He gestured. He became agitated when denied information. Standard interventions followed: sedatives, isolation, behavioral conditioning. Grace adjusted the protocol incrementally, ensuring that frustration never tipped into clarity. Confusion had to feel natural, inevitable. Weeks turned into months. Finn's photographic memory, once an asset, became a liability. Fragments surfaced without context, images without names, emotions without source. The brain, desperate for coherence, began to let go. By the end of the first year, patient 402 no longer asked where he was. By the second, he stopped responding to the sound of his own voice. By the third, his records described him as stable. Grace read that word often. Stable meant compliant. Stable meant erased enough to function. It meant the system had succeeded. To Dr. Ellis, patient 402 was a triumph, a proof of concept that identity could be dismantled without visible damage. To Grace, he was something else, entirely. He was symmetry. She never framed what she was doing as punishment. Punishment implied anger. This was calibration. Finn Brown had once reduced her to silence without consequence. Now, he existed in silence by design. For the first time in her life, Grace felt the weight of control settle evenly. And still, the experiment was not finished. Yosemite National Park has a way of swallowing certainty. Each year, thousands of visitors underestimate its scale, its cliffs that drop without warning, its rivers that move faster than they appear, its vast stretches of wilderness where sound dies quickly and help arrives slowly. Disappearances there rarely require explanation. Nature provides one. Grace understood that. Months before Finn Brown ever set foot in Yosemite, the location had already been chosen, not for symbolism, but for plausibility. A photographer traveling alone, rugged terrain, documented accidents, a place where absence was expected and closure was optional. Finn planned the trip with excitement, unaware he was following a path already mapped. He arrived in early June 2015, carrying his camera gear, a detailed itinerary, and the familiar confidence that the world would continue to open for him. He told friends he was chasing light sunrise over cliffs, mist over water, solitude framed perfectly in glass. His social media posts were cheerful, aspirational, a young artist on the brink of something bigger. No one noticed the subtle adjustments, a missed check-in, a change in trail plans, a message sent and deleted. Finn believed these were his choices. They were not. The encounter was brief, precise, and intentionally unremarkable. Grace had learned that the most effective manipulations left no emotional footprint. There was no struggle near the cliff. The broken tripod told the story investigators wanted to hear. Equipment failure, loss of balance, panic. The scene was curated carefully, not staged theatrically, but nudged. A leg bent the wrong way, camera missing, footprints that led close enough to suggest a fall, then disappeared into rock. By the time rangers arrived, the narrative had already formed. Search and rescue teams mobilized quickly. Helicopters swept the area. Divers combed the river below. Volunteers scanned trails and ravines. Finn's name joined a list of others who had vanished under similar circumstances. His face circulated briefly, then less frequently, then not at all. Nature absorbed the blame. Behind the scenes, paperwork did the rest. A missing persons report filed in one jurisdiction, an unidentified patient intake in another, two systems running parallel, never intersecting. The margin for error was slim, but Grace had planned for that too. Finn regained consciousness in a controlled environment. There were no windows, no clocks, no familiar objects. The lighting never changed. Voices spoke in neutral tones, using words designed to soothe without revealing. When he tried to speak, his mouth felt heavy. His thoughts came fragmented, disorganized. Panic rose, then receded under chemical pressure. He did not remember falling. He remembered light, stone, motion, then nothing. At Silver Creek Clinic, Finn was not informed he had been rescued. He was not told he had been found. He was told nothing at all. The absence of information forced his mind to fill gaps, but the environment offered no material to work with. Confusion became constant. Every attempt to orient himself failed. He asked for his camera, for his name, for time. The responses were deliberately vague. Sometimes there were none. The lack of resistance was more destabilizing than confrontation would have been. Within weeks, Finn began to doubt his own questions. Search efforts in Yosemite slowed, funding diminished, leads dried up. Without evidence of foul play, the case drifted toward statistical obscurity. Finn's parents held on to hope longer than most, but hope without direction erodes quietly. Eventually, even they were left with questions no system could answer. A year after his disappearance, Finn Brown was declared legally missing. At Silver Creek, patient 402's file thickened. The early phase focused on destabilization, interrupting memory consolidation, limiting language, suppressing emotional spikes. Once disorientation set in, the second phase began. Replacement. New routines, new responses, new compliance. Finn's mind resisted longer than most. Grace noted this with interest. Resilience delayed the process, but it did not stop it. In some ways, it made the eventual collapse more complete. The stronger the identity, the more dramatic its dissolution. By the time Finn's name stopped triggering any visible reaction, Yosemite had already faded from public memory. To the world, the case was over. To Grace, it had only just reached equilibrium, because disappearance was never the goal. Time does not pass normally when it is not acknowledged. Inside Silver Creek Clinic, days were not measured, they were administered. Light arrived and faded on a schedule that never varied. Meals appeared without explanation. Medication followed routine, not need. Without clocks or calendars, the body adjusted to repetition, while the mind slowly lost its ability to anticipate anything at all. Patient 402 adapted because survival demanded it. In the early months, fragments of Finn Brown still surfaced. Images without context, a cliff edge, the sound of water, the weight of a camera strap against his neck. These memories arrived uninvited and vanished just as quickly, leaving behind a sense of loss he could not explain. Language deteriorated next. At first, his speech slowed. Words felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else. Then sentences fractured. Finally, silence became easier than effort. Staff recorded this as progress, reduced agitation, improved compliance. Grace noted the exact point when silence stopped being enforced and became voluntary. Identity followed. Without mirrors, Finn could not anchor himself to a face. Without a name, he could not attach memory to meaning. He responded to gestures, routines, numbers. The brain, starved of narrative, rewired itself toward efficiency. Feelings dulled. Curiosity narrowed. Fear softened into resignation. Patient 402 became predictable. Grace reviewed his file weekly. She never intervened directly. Intervention would have personalized the process, and personalization risked recognition. Instead, she adjusted protocols remotely, calibrating exposure and withdrawal with surgical precision. There were setbacks. On rare occasions, something slipped through an image, a word, a sensation too familiar to suppress. One afternoon, patient 402 froze mid-task, staring at nothing. His heart rate spiked. He whispered a name he could not place. The incident report listed it as a transient cognitive flare. Grace marked it as evidence. Memory, she understood, does not disappear. It disorganizes. The goal was not deletion, but dominance, ensuring the present overwhelmed the past every time it surfaced. Year 2 stripped away resistance. By then, patient 402 no longer initiated communication. He followed instructions automatically, eyes vacant but alert. He slept deeply, dreamlessly. His emotional responses flattened into a narrow band, neither distressed nor content. He existed. To Dr. Ellis, this was success. He documented the case as a landmark example of identity dissolution without physical trauma. Grant proposals referenced patient 402 indirectly, obscuring details behind anonymized data. The clinic's reputation grew quietly. Grace felt something closer to completion. Yet the third year introduced an unexpected variable: stability. Patient 402 stopped deteriorating. His condition plateaued. No new losses, no new gains. He functioned within the system perfectly. For the first time, Grace questioned whether the process had reached its natural limit. Then the dreams began. Night staff reported disturbances, restlessness, vocalizations during sleep, increased heart rate. Patient 402 couldn't describe the dreams, only the after effects: unease, confusion, and unplaceable grief. Grace recognized the danger immediately. Dreams bypass control. They reconstructed memory without permission. Medication adjustments followed. Isolation periods lengthened, stimuli reduced further. The dreams diminished, but something fundamental had shifted. Beneath the compliance, something was reorganizing. By the fourth year, cracks appeared. Patient 402 began reacting to visual stimuli. A photograph in a research journal, left accidentally in view, the reflection of light on polished metal. His breathing changed, his focus sharpened briefly, then collapsed. These moments were rare, but they mattered. Grace realized the system had succeeded too well. Finn Brown was gone. But what remained was unstable in a new way. A mind erased without replacement did not remain empty forever. It searched. Outside the clinic, bureaucracy stirred. An internal audit triggered by unrelated funding discrepancies brought Silver Creek under mild scrutiny. Nothing alarming yet, but oversight, even shallow, was dangerous. Dr. Ellis dismissed the concern. Grace did not. For the first time in years, she considered an ending. Closure had always been abstract, a state of balance, not an event. Now, it required decision. Maintain containment indefinitely, or risk exposure by transition. Either choice carried consequence. Grace reviewed patient 402's file one last time. 4 years earlier, Finn Brown had vanished into the wilderness. Now, a nameless man existed in his place, quiet, compliant, fractured. The symmetry was almost perfect. Almost. No disappearance stays buried forever. Silver Creek Clinic did not collapse in a single moment. There were no sirens, no dramatic arrests at dawn. The unraveling came quietly, through paperwork, and processed the same mechanisms that had allowed it to operate unchecked for so long. The audit began as a routine financial review, grant inconsistencies, missing documentation, a discrepancy in pharmaceutical inventory that could not be easily explained. For Dr. Arthur Ellis, it was an inconvenience. For Grace Miller, it was inevitability. Oversight invites memory. External reviewers requested patient outcome data, consent forms, admission pathways. Silver Creek complied selectively, providing sanitized summaries and anonymized case studies, but systems rarely fail in isolation. One request led to another, a name referenced where a number should have been, a timeline that didn't align. Patient 402 became a liability. Grace recognized the danger immediately. The longer he remained, the greater the risk of discovery, not because of his condition, but because of the perfection of it. Identity erasure without trauma raised questions that ethical review boards were trained to ask. Dr. Ellis resisted termination of the program. He saw patient 402 as legacy. Grace saw him as exposure. The disagreement marked the first fracture between them. As scrutiny increased, patient 402 was transferred to a general ward, an environment less controlled, less precise. The shift destabilized him almost immediately. New voices, new routines, faces he was not conditioned to ignore. The system that had erased him could not protect him from variability. And variability triggered memory. It began with recognition not of people, but of self. Patient 402 reacted to his reflection for the first time in years. He stared too long, touched his face. Staff noted agitation. Grace noted emergence. During a routine evaluation conducted by an external psychiatrist, patient 402 spoke a full sentence. It was fragmented, incorrect, but it existed. That was enough. The evaluation triggered a deeper review. Intake records were re-examined. Admission logs cross-referenced with missing persons databases. A match surfaced, not immediate, not definitive, but plausible. Finn Brown. The name entered the room like a contaminant. Grace was present when it happened. She observed the shift in patient 402's posture, the slight tightening around his eyes. Recognition did not arrive fully, but something aligned. A sound, a frequency, a pattern his mind had been circling for years. Dr. Ellis attempted to intervene. He cited patient fragility, research confidentiality, clinical risk. His objections were recorded and overruled. Within weeks, Silver Creek Clinic was shut down pending investigation. Patient 402 was transferred to a state facility specializing in trauma recovery. There, for the first time in 4 years, someone asked him what he remembered. He did not say Finn Brown. Not yet. Recovery was slow, uneven, and incomplete. Memory returned in fragments, often untrustworthy. Identity reconstruction proved more complex than its destruction. Finn struggled with guilt he couldn't place, fear he couldn't name, and a past that felt borrowed rather than lived. Grace Miller was questioned but never charged. Her actions lived in legal gray zones, ethically indefensible, procedurally insulated. She resigned quietly, disappeared again into systems designed to forget. The symmetry she had engineered did not collapse. It dissolved. Dr. Ellis lost his license. Publicly, the case was framed as medical misconduct, oversight failure, a cautionary tale about unregulated research. Finn Brown's disappearance was reopened, then quietly closed again, this time with more truth than resolution. Finn did not return to photography. Cameras felt invasive. Framing felt dishonest. He struggled to exist without questioning how easily existence could be dismantled. He lived carefully, quietly, aware that identity was not inherent, it was maintained. Grace never contacted him. She did not need to. The balance she sought had been achieved, though not cleanly. She had proven what she set out to prove, not just about Finn, but about systems, cruelty, and the casual violence of power. Finn had once erased her without consequence. She erased him with precision. And in the end, both learned the same truth. That disappearance does not require death, only permission.